The champagne in Elena's glass caught the light of the chandelier, sparkling just like the lie she had been living for months. From across the crowded Manhattan penthouses, Lucas watched his wife lean into another man, her laugh a little too loud, her hand lingering on a bicep that wasn't his. He touched the phone in his pocket, feeling the vibration of a wire transfer that would change everything. Yet he remained silent, a ghost in his own marriage. If you are drawn to stories about the quiet devastation of betrayal and the cold, sharp edge of redemption, stay with me. The most dangerous secrets are the ones we keep from the people we sleep next to. The air in the ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of transactional conversation. It was the annual gala for Vertex PR, and for Elena Graham, it was the most important night of the year. Lucas stood near a marble pillar, nursing a glass of sparkling water he didn't want. He adjusted the collar of his tuxedo, a rental Elena had insisted, despite the fact that he could have bought the entire hotel floor with the royalties from his last quarter alone. But that was the game. To Elena, he was Lucas, the struggling freelancer, the dreamer who dabbled in writing while she carried the weight of their Manhattan existence on her shoulders. "Lucas, try not to look so bored," Elena whispered, appearing at his elbow. Her emerald dress was stunning, hugging her frame in a way that used to make his breath catch. Now her beauty felt like a weapon she sharpened for others. "I'm not bored, Elle," Lucas said, his voice calm. "I'm just observing. It's what writers do." "Well, observe from somewhere else for a moment. Mark is coming over, and I need this conversation to go perfectly. He's thinking of promoting me to senior VP. Lucas looked past her. Mark, the director of operations, was cutting through the crowd. He was tall, polished, and wore a suit that shouted its price tag. He was everything Lucas wasn't: loud, assertive, and undeniably present. "Elena," Mark greeted, his smile a fraction too wide, his eyes lingering on her neckline a second too long, before flicking dismissively to Lucas. "And the husband, Lucas, right? Still working on the blog?" "It's a novel," Lucas corrected gently. "Right, the novel." Mark chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Admirable. I don't know how you do it, Elena. Supporting a starving artist in this city? You're a saint." Elena laughed, and the sound twisted in Lucas's gut. It wasn't a nervous laugh, it was an agreeing one. She reached out and touched Mark's forearm, a gesture so casual yet so intimate that the noise of the party seemed to fade into a dull roar for Lucas. "He has his moments," Elena said, her eyes locked on Mark. "But yes, it's exhausting. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only adult in the room." Lucas took a sip of his water. The irony was bitter. In his pocket, his phone buzzed, silently. It was a text from his literary agent, Sarah. "The auction for the film rights to The Silent Echo just closed. Universal put down 8 figures. We need to talk about the press release. Elias Thorne can't stay a ghost forever." He looked at the screen, then back at his wife. She was glowing under Mark's attention, her back slightly turned to Lucas, effectively boxing him out of the circle. She was ashamed of him. She had constructed a narrative where she was the martyr and he was the burden, and she had repeated it so many times she believed it. "I'm going to get some fresh air," Lucas said. Neither of them heard him. Mark was leaning in close, whispering something that made Elena flush pink. As Lucas turned away, he caught a glimpse of their reflection in the darker window pane. Mark's hand had drifted to the small of Elena's back. His fingers splayed possessively. Elena didn't pull away. She leaned back into it. Lucas walked through the gilded doors toward the terrace, the cold November wind hitting his face. He looked out over the skyline of Central Park. He had been waiting for the right moment to tell her the truth. That Elias Thorne, the mystery writer she obsessively read and quoted, was the man she made sleep on the couch when he typed too loud. He pulled his phone out and typed a reply to his agent. "Not yet. 1 more week." He deleted it. Then he typed, "Let's talk tomorrow." He turned back to look through the glass doors. Elena and Mark were no longer in the center of the room. They were moving toward the elevators, heading up to the suites. Lucas stood alone on the balcony, the city lights blurring below him. The realization settled in his chest, heavy and cold. He wasn't a husband anymore. He was just an obstacle, and obstacles could be removed. The silence in the apartment was usually something Lucas cherished. It was the fuel for his writing, the blank canvas where he built the twisting plots of Elias Thorne's novels. But tonight, 3 days after the gala, the silence felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on his arms stand up. Elena was in the shower. The sound of the water running was a distant hiss behind the closed bathroom door. On the kitchen island, her iPad sat propped up against a fruit bowl. She had been using it to review a slide deck for a morning presentation, or so she said. Lucas was making coffee, his movements mechanical. As he reached for a mug, the iPad screen lit up. The harsh white glow cut through the dim kitchen lighting. It wasn't a calendar reminder. It was a notification from an app hidden deep in a folder of utilities. Mark, has the anchor dropped off to sleep yet? I'm still thinking about you in that elevator. Lucas stopped. The mug hovered in his hand an inch from the counter. He didn't touch the screen. He didn't need to unlock it to see the preview. The timestamp was now. The anchor. That was what she called him. Not a partner, not a husband, but a heavy weight keeping her from drifting into the glamorous life she felt she deserved. He set the mug down silently. The bathroom door opened, releasing a cloud of steam and the scent of expensive lavender soap. Lucas turned his back to the island, pretending to wash a spoon in the sink. Did you make coffee? Elena asked, wrapping a silk robe around herself. Her voice was light, casual, the voice of a woman with nothing to hide. Decaf, Lucas lied. I'm heading to bed soon. Good, you look tired, Lucas. You really should try to get on a normal sleep schedule. Staying up all night writing those stories. It's aging you. She walked past him, her hand brushing his shoulder. It was a cold, perfunctory touch. An hour later, the bedroom was dark. Lucas lay on his side, his breathing rhythmic and deep, a performance he had perfected over the years to avoid late-night conversations about his lack of ambition. Elena was sitting up in bed next to him. He could feel the shift in the mattress. The blue light of her phone illuminated the ceiling. She wasn't sleeping. She was typing. Then she slid out of bed. She didn't leave the room. She just walked to the window that looked out over the street, cracking it open slightly to light a cigarette, a habit she swore to him she had quit 2 years ago. She dialed a number. Hey, she whispered. The tone was different, soft, vulnerable, a voice Lucas hadn't heard directed at him in years. No, he's out, like a light. A pause. I know, Mark, I know, but I can't just kick him out. The lease is in both our names until January, and honestly, I don't want to deal with the drama right now. He's pathetic enough as it is. If I leave him, he has nothing. I'd feel like I'm kicking the puppy. Lucas lay perfectly still, staring at the dark wall. His heart wasn't racing. It had slowed down to a dull, heavy thud. Yeah, Elena laughed, a low, smoky sound. God, I wish I was with you. The way you looked at me at the gala. I felt like I actually existed. Here, I'm just carrying someone else's life. She took a drag of the cigarette, the smoke drifting back into the room, acrid and sharp. Soon, Mark, I promise. Once I get the promotion, I'll have the leverage to cut the cord. I just need to figure out how to do it without looking like the bad guy. Lucas closed his eyes. The pain was there, sharp and visceral. But beneath it, something else was forming. It was the cold detachment of a narrator observing a tragedy. He realized then that the woman by the window wasn't the person he had married. She was a stranger who viewed his kindness as weakness and his silence as stupidity. She thought she was trapped with him. She had no idea that she was the one locked in a cage and he held the only key. Elena finished her call, stubbed out the cigarette, and climbed back into bed. She turned her back to him, pulling the duvet tight. Lucas didn't sleep. He lay awake, listening to the city breathe, and began to draft the final chapter of their marriage in his head. Tuesday morning arrived with the aggressive clatter of heels on hardwood. Elena was running late, a whirlwind of stress and hairspray. She moved through the apartment like a storm system, snatching her purse, her tablet, and her travel mug, barely glancing at Lucas, who sat at the breakfast nook with a half-eaten toast. I'm going to be late tonight, she said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. She adjusted a stray lock of hair, her expression tight. Mark has us working overtime on the Verizon pitch. Don't wait up. I won't, Lucas said. She didn't catch the finality in his tone. She simply nodded, the door clicked shut, and the lock engaged. The silence that followed was different from the night before. It wasn't heavy, it was waiting. Lucas stood up and rinsed his plate. He didn't rush. There was no need. He had planned this logistics with the same meticulous plotting he used for his novels. He walked into the study, the small, windowless room Elena had graciously allowed him to use as an office. He opened his laptop and initiated a secure video call. "It's done?" a man's voice asked through the speakers. It was Arthur, his attorney and one of the 3 people on Earth who knew the face of Elias Thorne. "She's gone," Lucas replied. "Execute the separation protocols." "Understood. The automatic transfers from the blind trust to the joint account will cease immediately at noon. I've prepared the settlement offer." "It's generous, Lucas. More than she deserves given the circumstances." "It's not about what she deserves," Lucas said, looking at the bookshelf where his own books were absent, replaced by PR awards and decorative vases. "It's about a clean break. I don't want her coming after me for money. Give her enough to feel secure, but cut the lifeline for the penthouse. She'll have to figure out the rent on her own now." "Very well. The car is downstairs." Lucas closed the laptop. He didn't pack clothes. He didn't pack toiletries. He didn't want anything that smelled like this apartment. He took only his hard drive, his passport, and a small leather-bound notebook. He walked into the master bedroom. The bed was unmade. Elena sat in a tangle of sheets where she had tossed and turned, dreaming of another man. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out his wedding band. It was a simple gold band, scratched from years of wear. He placed it on the nightstand, right next to the empty space where her phone usually charged. Next to the ring, he placed a thick manila envelope. Inside were the divorce papers, already signed in blue ink. The grounds cited were standard: irreconcilable differences. There was no mention of Mark, no accusation of adultery, just a legal ending to an emotional death. He walked out to the living room, taking one last look at the panoramic view of the city. It was a beautiful view, one that cost $12,000 a month, $8,000 of which had been quietly siphoned from his royalties into their joint bills, labeled as family assistance or freelance bonuses to spare her ego. She would find out the true cost of her lifestyle very soon. Lucas placed his house key on the marble counter of the kitchen island. The metal made a sharp clink, the only sound in the vast room. He put on his coat and walked to the door. He didn't look back. He didn't slam the door. He closed it gently, ensuring the latch clicked into place. Downstairs, the doorman, Henry, tipped his hat. "Heading out for the day, Mr. Graham?" "Heading out, Henry," Lucas said, stepping into the black SUV waiting at the curb. "Take care of yourself." As the car pulled away, merging into the stream of yellow taxis and rushing pedestrians, Lucas Graham exhaled. He watched the building shrink in the rearview mirror until it was just another piece of the skyline. He was gone. When Elena walked through the door that Tuesday evening, the apartment was dark. This wasn't unusual. Lucas often worked with the lights off, the glow of his laptop the only illumination in the living room. But the air felt different, stagnant, cold. "Lucas?" she called out, tossing her keys into the bowl. They landed with a loud clatter that echoed too long. She flipped the switch. The living room was pristine. Too pristine. The throw blanket was folded with military precision. The blinds were drawn. Then she saw it. On the kitchen island, where there should have been a half-finished manuscript or a grocery list, there was only a small pile of items: a house key, a gold wedding band, and a thick envelope. Elena walked over, her heels clicking on the marble. She picked up the ring. It felt light, insignificant. She opened the envelope. Divorce decree. Petitioner, Lucas Graham. She scanned the document, her heart rate spiking not with sorrow, but with a strange, defensive anger. He hadn't even waited for her to do it. He had quit before she could fire him. There was no note, no tear-stained letter begging for a second chance. Just legal jargon in a signature that looked firm, unwavering. She dropped the papers and laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound. "Fine," she whispered to the empty room. "Be that way." She grabbed her phone and dialed Mark. "He's gone. It's over. You can come over." The first 2 weeks were a blur of champagne and adrenaline. Mark moved in with 2 suitcases of designer suits and a collection of expensive scotch. The apartment, once a quiet zone of typing and soft jazz, was now filled with loud music and the scent of Mark's cologne. It felt like a victory lap. Elena told herself she had finally trimmed the dead weight, but the rot set in quietly in the corners of their life. It started with the small things. The trash can overflowed. Lucas used to take it out every night before bed. Elena realized she didn't even know what day the building collected refuse. The dishwasher remained full of dirty plates for 3 days because Mark didn't do domestic. Then came the first of the month. Elena sat at the dining table, her banking app open on her iPad. She stared at the screen, frowning. The auto draft for the rent, $12,000, was pending, but the balance in the joint account was dangerously low. She scrolled back through the history. For years, there had been regular deposits labeled freelance income, ranging from $5,000 to $8,000 a month. She had always assumed these were small trickles from Lucas's writing, barely worth noting compared to her salary. She had never done the math. The deposits had stopped the day he left. "Mark," she called out. Mark was on the sofa, watching a Knicks game, his feet propped on the coffee table, shoes still on. He didn't look up. "Yeah, babe? The rent is due. Since you're living here now, I was thinking we could split it. It's $6,000 each." Mark turned his head slowly, a look of genuine confusion on his face. "$6,000? Elena, I have my own place in Soho I'm paying for. I'm not paying rent twice. Besides, I thought you owned this place. You always acted like you did." We leased it. It's a corporate lease," she stammered, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "But without Lucas's share." Mark laughed, turning back to the TV. "Wait, the starving artist was paying half the rent? I thought you were the sugar mama. You might need to downsize, babe. This place is a bit much, anyway." He took a sip of his scotch, Lucas's scotch, she realized, and cheered as a player made a basket. Elena looked around the room. There was a wine stain on the rug from 2 nights ago that Mark hadn't cleaned up. The plants in the corner were drooping. Lucas used to water them on Thursdays. The silence she had detested was gone, replaced by the noise of a man who took up all the space but offered no support. She walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. She had traded a man who silently built the foundation of her life for a man who was currently scuffing it with his dress shoes. For the first time, the penthouse didn't feel like a trophy. It felt like a cage she could no longer afford. 3 years had transformed the landscape of Lucas's life, much like the seasons changing over the Hudson Valley. The cramped, tension-filled air of the Manhattan penthouse was a distant memory, replaced by the scent of pine, wood smoke, and wet earth. Lucas stood on the deck of his estate in Cold Spring, watching the morning mist roll off the Hudson River. The house was an architectural marvel of glass and timber, hidden deep within 20 acres of private woodland. It was the kind of home that appeared in magazines, bought and paid for with a single royalty check from the European sales of the Silent Echo. Inside, the phone on his mahogany desk rang. It wasn't the frantic, demanding ring of a spouse asking why the laundry wasn't done. It was the dedicated line for his agent, Sarah. Lucas slid the glass door shut, cutting off the chill, and picked up the receiver. "Morning, Sarah." "Lucas, tell me you've seen the Variety article." Sarah's voice was electric, vibrating with the kind of energy that usually preceded a 7-figure contract. "I haven't," Lucas admitted, walking over to the fireplace to stir the embers. "I've been hiking. What does it say?" "It says the studio is pushing for a premiere date for the film adaptation. They have the A-list cast, they have the director, but the marketing team is losing their minds. They're calling you the Salinger of the 21st century. They need a face, Lucas. The mystery was a great hook for the first 5 books, but for the franchise, they need the man." Lucas watched the flames lick at the dry oak log. For 3 years, he had lived in this sanctuary. He had healed here. He had realized that his worth wasn't tied to Elena's validation or the social hierarchy of New York's PR scene. He was Elias Thorne, a name that commanded respect in 40 languages. "I know," Lucas said softly. "The network offers are piling up," Sarah continued, her voice softening. "Prime time, a sit-down interview, no gotcha questions, Just you, your work, and the truth. It's time, Lucas. You don't have to hide anymore. You didn't do anything wrong. Lucas touched the scar on his hand, a small burn from a cooking accident years ago, a memory of a dinner he made for Elena that she never came home to eat. He wasn't hiding because he was afraid. He had been hiding because he was healing. But the wound was closed now. The scarred tissue was tough. "Okay," Lucas said. The line went silent for a beat. "Okay? You mean, yes?" "Yes, set it up. But I have conditions. I want it live, no edits, and I want it to air on Sunday night." "Sunday night, that's the Super Bowl of news slots. They'll kill for that." "Lucas, are you sure? Once you do this, there is no going back. The anonymity is gone." Lucas looked around his study. The walls were lined with first editions of his books. There was no clutter, no pretense. This was his life now. He had built it brick by brick, word by word, without anyone carrying him. "I'm sure," Lucas replied, his voice steady. "I'm tired of being a ghost story. It's time to be the author." He hung up the phone and walked back to the window. Somewhere south of here, in the concrete grid of the city, life was grinding on. He wondered fleetingly if Elena was still climbing that ladder she loved so much. He wondered if she knew that the ladder was leaning against a wall he had built. He smiled, a genuine, calm expression that reached his eyes. It didn't matter. The world was about to meet Elias Thorne, and Lucas Graham was finally ready to introduce him. The conference room at Vertex PR was vibrating with a nervous, electric energy. It was 8:50 p.m. on a Sunday, a time when the office should have been dark, but tonight every light was blazing. Takeout boxes from high-end sushi places littered the sleek glass table, and a case of champagne sat on ice, waiting for a celebration that was far from guaranteed. Elena stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the rain streaking the glass. She adjusted the waistband of her skirt. It was a little looser than it had been 3 years ago. The stress of the last few years had carved hollows beneath her cheekbones that no amount of concealer could fully hide. "You really think he's going to hire us?" Mark asked. He was sprawled in the ergonomically designed chair at the head of the table, spinning a pen between his fingers. He looked heavier, his face puffy from too many nights of networking that mostly involved scotch and very little business. "He has to," Elena said, turning to face the room. She forced the confident smile that used to come naturally. "Elias Thorne is a recluse. He doesn't know the media landscape. He's going to need a shield, and we are the best shield in the city." "We were the best," Mark muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "Before the scandal with the senator." Elena shot him a glare. The agency had taken a hit last year, and her own finances were bleeding out trying to maintain the penthouse in Mark's lifestyle. Mark had turned out to be a man of expensive tastes and mediocre talent. The promotion he had promised her 3 years ago had materialized, but without the pay raise, she needed to cover the gap Lucas had left. "This is the turnaround," Elena insisted, addressing the junior associates who looked tired and anxious. "I've read every word this man has written. I know how he thinks. His prose. It's deeply personal. He writes about betrayal, about the quiet agony of being unseen. I can connect with that. I can sell that." She believed it. She had devoured The Silent Echo and the subsequent novels, finding a strange comfort in the author's voice. It was compassionate, observant, and heartbreakingly wise. She had often found herself thinking that if she had met a man like Elias Thorne instead of Lucas, her life would have been different. Thorne was a genius. Lucas had just been a distraction. "5 minutes to air," someone shouted from the AV station. The giant projection screen at the front of the room flickered to life, displaying the logo of the national network. The dramatic intro music for the special broadcast began to play, the unmasking of a legend. Elena took a seat next to Mark. Her palms were sweating. She had drafted a 3-page pitch email that she planned to send the second the segment ended, referencing specific details from the interview to prove she was listening. "Pass the bottle," Mark said, reaching for the champagne. "Let's toast to the cash cow." "Not yet," Elena snapped. "Show some respect. This is history." On the screen, the host, a legendary journalist known for her hard-hitting interviews, sat in 2 wingback chairs arranged in a cozy, dimly lit library setting. Good evening, and the host said, looking directly into the camera. For a decade, he has captivated the world with his thrillers. He has sold 50 million copies, yet no one knows his face. Tonight, that changes. Tonight, we sit down with the man behind the mystery. The camera began a slow pan. Elena leaned forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. She needed this. She needed Elias Thorne to be the savior who pulled her out of the mediocrity her life had become. She felt a strange kinship with him, a certainty that she could understand him better than anyone else. Everyone shut up, Mark hissed, though he was the only one making noise. The screen cut to a wide shot. A man was sitting in the chair opposite the host. He was wearing a charcoal suit, perfectly tailored, with a crisp white shirt open at the collar. His posture was relaxed, his hands resting calmly on his knees. The camera zoomed in. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Her brain stuttered, refusing to process the visual information. The image on the screen was familiar, yet impossibly wrong. The scar on the hand, the tilt of the head, the eyes, those calm, observant eyes that had watched her from the corner of a room for 5 years. Please welcome, the host said, her voice echoing in the silent conference room. Lucas Graham, writing as Elias Thorne. The champagne glass in Elena's hand slipped. It hit the edge of the glass table and shattered, but the sound was swallowed by the sudden, deafening roar of blood rushing in her ears. The shard of glass lay on the carpet, glistening in the harsh light of the projector screen, but no one moved to clean it up. The silence in the Vertex conference room was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the air out of Elena's lungs. On the screen, Lucas leaned back in his chair, a small, enigmatic smile playing on his lips. A smile Elena had seen 1,000 times across their breakfast table, usually when she was lecturing him about his lack of direction. You chose to remain anonymous for a decade, the host said, leaning in with fascination. Your books have earned millions, won awards, and been translated into 40 languages. Why hide? Why let the world think you didn't exist? Lucas adjusted his cuff. I didn't want the fame. I wanted the work to stand on its own. And to be honest, it allowed me to observe. Being invisible is a powerful tool for a writer. You see people as they really are when they think you don't matter. A collective gasp went through the room. A junior associate, a young girl who idolized Elena, turned slowly. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of shock and pity. Elena, she whispered, isn't that your husband? Elena couldn't speak. Her throat felt like it was filled with dry ash. She was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. On screen, the interview continued. Your latest book, The Anchor, deals with a marriage falling apart due to a lack of respect, a host noted. Is it autobiographical? Elena stopped breathing. Lucas paused. He looked directly into the camera lens. For a terrifying second, Elena felt like he was looking right through the screen, stripping her bare in front of her entire staff. Fiction is always rooted in truth, Lucas said, his voice smooth, devoid of bitterness. I was married for 5 years. I loved her very much. But we were living in two different realities. She fell in love with a lifestyle, and I was just the person standing in the way of it. I realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is remove yourself from the equation. He's talking about you, Mark said. His voice wasn't soft. It was incredulous. He wasn't looking at Elena with sympathy. He was looking at the screen with greed. Elena, do you have any idea what his net worth is? The Silent Echo deal alone was reported at 15 million. 15 million. The number hit Elena like a physical blow. She remembered the night she had rolled her eyes when he asked to buy a new laptop. She remembered the way she had handed him a $20 bill for groceries like he was a child. She remembered Mark laughing at him at the gala, calling him a starving artist. And Lucas had sat there. He had taken it. He had absorbed their cruelty and transmuted it into gold, and he hadn't given her a single cent of credit. He paid for the apartment, Elena whispered, the realization horrifically clear. The trust fund, the freelance checks, it was all him. You mean we lost the client? Mark snapped, the veneer of the supportive boyfriend vanishing instantly. You lived with the biggest author in America, treated him like garbage, and let him walk out the door. Do you know what this does to the agency? We look like idiots. I didn't know, Elena stammered, tears blurring her vision. He never told me. He didn't tell you, Mark scoffed, standing up and buttoning his jacket. Because he obviously didn't trust you. And looking at this, he gestured to the screen where Lucas was now laughing at a joke the host made, looking charming, successful, and utterly free. I don't blame him. The room was spinning. The faces of her colleagues, people she had mentored, people she had bossed around, blurred into a mural of judgment. They weren't looking at a senior VP anymore. They were looking at a fool. On the screen, the segment was wrapping up. Thank you, Lucas Graham, the host said. Or should I say Elias Thorne? Lucas is fine, he said. Elias was just a mask. I'm done wearing it. The screen faded to black, but the image was burned into Elena's retinas. She tried to stand, to rally, to say something that would salvage the situation, but her legs gave out. She sank back into the chair, the sound of Mark leaving the room echoing in the hallway, leaving her alone in the wreckage of her own ambition. February in New York was unforgiving. The wind whipped down Broadway, cutting through layers of wool and cashmere, stinging faces with invisible ice. Outside the Strand bookstore near Union Square, the line wrapped around the block. Elena stood near the end of the queue, shivering despite her coat. She wasn't wearing the emerald gown from the gala, nor the sharp power suits of her Vertex days. She wore a simple gray trench coat, her hair pulled back in a low, unpretentious bun. Vertex had let her go 3 months ago. The Elias Thorne debacle, as it was whispered in industry circles, had been the final nail. Mark was gone too. He had jumped ship to a rival agency the week the money ran dry, taking his Nespresso machine and his false promises with him. She clutched a copy of The Anchor to her chest. It was a hardcover, first edition. She hadn't bought it to read, she had lived the first draft, but because she needed a ticket to get in. It took 2 hours to reach the front doors. Inside, the store was warm and smelled of paper and coffee. A hush of reverence hung over the main floor. At the far end, behind a table draped in black cloth, sat Lucas. He looked different in person than he had on TV. He looked healthier. There was a fullness to his face, a light in his eyes as he chatted with a young college student, signing her book with a flourish. He laughed, a genuine, deep sound that Elena hadn't heard in 5 years. She stepped forward as the line moved. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She rehearsed what she would say. I'm sorry. I was blind. I miss you. Not the money, just the quiet. Next, the security guard grunted, waving her forward. Elena walked to the table. She placed the book down. Her hands were trembling. Lucas was finishing a sip of water. He set the bottle down and looked up, his pen hovering over the title page. Hi there, who should I make this out to? He stopped. The smile didn't drop from his face, but it changed. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a polite, impenetrable mask. It was the face one wears when running into an old acquaintance whose name one can barely remember. The silence between them lasted only a second, but it stretched into an eternity. Elena, he said. His voice was level. No anger, no malice, just nothing. Lucas, she breathed, her voice cracking. I saw the interview. I just wanted to. She trailed off. What could she say? The magnitude of her mistake was too large for words. She looked at him, searching for a flicker of the man who used to make her tea when she was sick. The man who had silently paid for her vanity. I'm glad you came, Lucas said. He opened the book. He didn't look at her, he looked at the page. I hope you're doing well. I'm not, she whispered, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. I lost everything, Lucas. Mark left. The job is gone. I'm living in a studio in Queens. Lucas paused. The pen froze for a microsecond. Then he continued writing. I'm sorry to hear that, he said. The tone was professional, distant, the same tone he had used for the fan before her. You're resilient, Elena. You'll figure it out. You always liked the climb. He closed the book and slid it across the table toward her. Lucas, please, she said, her hand reaching out to touch his sleeve. The security guard stepped forward instantly. Ma'am, please keep the line moving. Lucas didn't wave the guard off. He didn't reach back. He simply looked past her to the person standing behind her shoulder. Next, please, Lucas said, his voice bright and welcoming again. Elena stood there, paralyzed. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't lectured her. He had done something far worse. He had treated her like a customer. She grabbed the book and turned away, her vision blurring. She walked past the rows of smiling fans, out the double doors, and back into the biting cold of the city. Under the street lamp, she opened the book to the title page. She expected a message, a final word, a quote, something that acknowledged their 5 years of marriage. In blue ink, in his sharp, confident handwriting, it read, "To Elena, best of luck. Elias Thorne." She closed the book. The wind howled down Broadway, indifferent to her tears, carrying the noise of the city that had once been hers, but now belonged to him.